Hello everybody, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today I would like to share my final thoughts on the QYGMGS model GD22T. I know, weird ass name, but regardless, this knife was sent to me for the purpose of review. That will not be affecting really anything and me giving you guys my honest opinion. This knife you can purchase right now for $42.99. Currently, this price may go up or down and fluctuate all around, just depending on which direction the brand is going. There is only this colorway available, just all blacked out, everything black G10, black hardware, black D2 blade material. Right now, you're actually able to add a 5% coupon, which is cool. It's always appreciated, little coupons. I've never been the biggest fan of pulling specs off of Amazon, but for the most part, they're being true about it. So as I mentioned before, D2 tool steel for the blade material. This black stone wash, it actually looks pretty darn good. Check that out. G10 for the scales, a little back spacer. The blade length is 3.28 inches. What is the overall weight? It says it's 5.3 ounces, which I don't think that's right. I think this is a little bit lighter than that, but it is, in my opinion, a full-size knife for sure. So with that kind of stuff out of the way, and manufactured overseas in China, of course. Let's pull out a couple knives for size comparison. Let's do the Spyderco's. This is my pair of 3. Another all blacked out knife. PM2. So as you can see, it's right in between those two models. So if you're familiar with the dimensions of pair of 3, this just has a little bit more reach. And of course, a more utilitarian oriented blade shape, which is always welcomed. Let's do my Benchmates now. This is my Osborne 940, practically the same exact length, just a little bit taller in this dimension. And my bug out, a little bit bigger than the bug out, not by a whole lot, but it is worth noting. So yeah, definitely more along the size of the 940. 2 more left here. Civivi Elementum. Oh, definitely bigger. And Demco 8020.5. So again, just a little bit larger than everything here. On the listings on Amazon, I thought this knife was going to be a little bit smaller. That's all right. So I haven't really hard used this knife much because I got it at a time where I wasn't working, and so I was just tearing down cardboard and shredding through paper and other little packages here and there, just really testing the ergonomics, the blade, how well the D2 is heat treated. Is it good? Is it not? Is it noticeably softer than other brands that have D2, more common brands that you and I are familiar with? But I will say that everything here is pretty standard. There's nothing too much that I'd really complain about, but we'll get into a couple little things later on. This thing came well centered and is still holding up. I have taken this apart twice. I should have only really needed to take it apart once, but that was one of the complaints. I had to take it apart a second time to tinker around with the liner lock tension, and for whatever reason it just didn't go back together well the first time, but I was able to fix it on the second run. Hardware here, this is a T8 pivot, T6 for the body screws and the clip. The clip, unfortunately, is it's gonna get in the way of your pant material. And there's a rather large clip. It takes up almost half the length of the blade, or I guess the handle. Sits on top of the G10, and the screws are protruding as well. So it is a deep carry styled clip, but you will have a little bit coming out, nothing too crazy. Do have a nice little lanyard hole there for people who care about lanyards. Everything was well machined, and there wasn't any weird chipping or anything weird going on. I like how the backspacer is nicely machined and shaped. This isn't really something that you see on a lot of other budget-oriented knives. Most of the time they're just like one or two, cheapy steel standoffs. But it's nice that they include that. So that's something that I did take into consideration when, giving my final thoughts on this thing. Taking a look at this blade, it was pretty consistent for the most part, the cutting edge. It wasn't the craziest, sliciest blade ever when I did my unboxing, but I was able to sharpen it, lay back the angle just a little bit, and I got to the point that I'm happy with. Not super thin, not super thick. It does its job relatively well. I personally didn't notice any slowing down or hanging up after using this for a little bit in comparison to other knives in my collection that have D2, whether they're coated or not. I know any coatings can affect the heat treatment of certain blade material, but this, I think, for what you're paying for, is decent. It could be a little bit less than what it is, but remember, we are seeing a knife from a brand that is not as established, so it's costing them a little bit more because they're just not as well known. So they can't bring forth, super crazy, value per dollar. But for the most part, they're pretty darn good. I have reviewed 2 premium models from their line, and they are excellent. But the same complaint I had with those is that while they are awesome, they probably could have been manufactured the same quality, maybe a little bit better, and costing a little bit less by, let's say, We or Civivi, or who else would do a pretty decent job? Kunwu, just other brands that are overseas, but they have a much larger presence in the community. With that being said, I think these guys are doing pretty good for where they're at. They only have a handful of budget models, this being one of them, and just 2 premium ones. I have been chit-chatting with one of their social media market manager guys. There is a little bit of a language barrier, and but besides all that, it's not that big of a deal. I have been told that they do have new models coming out. I believe like 5 or so new models coming out this year, and I'm super excited to check them out, whether they send them to me or not. Chances are I'm probably going to be buying more of these, and you guys will see more because I actually like what they're doing here. So looking a little bit more at this guy, there is some weight relief. It's kind of difficult to see in there, but there's just a giant freaking hole in the steel liners for weight relief, which I think is awesome. That's one thing that I tend to complain about when it comes to other budget knife designs that are having steel liners in G10. Some people will argue against it, and that's completely okay, but I believe that with the scale material being rigid and dense enough, that the steel liners don't need to be so heavy duty, unless the design of the knife overall calls for, really bashing this thing into wood, batoning with it, doing crazy stuff, running it over with your giant lifted truck. You're not gonna be doing those kinds of things with a folding knife because that's what fixed blades are for. So I'm just saying, if I were to design a knife, I wouldn't make a bunch of small holes. I personally would just make one giant hole or multiple large holes to remove as much steel for weight relief, because you don't need super heavy knife. You need something that, like, this knife looks like it has a large presence, and it doesn't really feel like it's super heavy. Like, you get what I'm saying? It looks like it would weigh a lot because of the presence that it has, but it actually doesn't. Now, I don't have an actual little scale with me, unfortunately, and I don't completely trust those the weight on, you know, what Amazon was saying that this is, but I will say that it doesn't feel like it's super heavy, but it doesn't feel super light either. It feels like it was done right, actually. The balance of this guy is a little bit further back, but not by much. It's about right there. Still in the space of the finger choil, so it's again a little butt heavy. If they had removed that G10 backspacer and done what we see with a lot of other budget knives, the balancing on this, the balance would be perfect, in my opinion. So, talking about the action, this is running on ceramic bearings, has a ceramic detent ball, but it did take me a second to get it as smooth as it is without any blade play issues. So when I first got this, it was great. And as I do with almost every knife that I check out, whether, you know, it's cheap or expensive, I love taking apart the knife to see if it's finished just as well on the inside as it is on the outside. And yeah, I would say that this thing is finished pretty decently. They're not hiding anything. There aren't any like unfinished, like ugly parts to it. There are some like scratches and scuffs here and there on some of the not visible parts of the steel liners, which is not that great, but they're still, you know, well coated. They have, you know, the black coating on it, and it's pretty consistent all the way through. Same thing as the clip and all the hardware. They didn't come all, you know, chewed up looking or looking like they had been, you know, adjusted a bunch before being, you know, packed up and shipped out. So that's cool. But one of the issues that I had with this is when I took it apart, the detent was super light, and I couldn't actually get this blade out without it failing. I would kick it out and it would come out to like right there. And it's not because it was tight or anything. There isn't any play in side to side. There is no, I guess, detent, well, not detent lash, but like lock rock. There's no lock rock. It's solid now, but I had like all the issues you could think of. There was side to side play, detent lash, lock rock, because I myself did not put it back together properly. Now, I don't know what I did the second time. I think what I did is I just worked my way down. When I went to reassemble, I did the pivot first, body screws, and then the clip, and that was fine. The first way that I did it, I think I had just tried, I put everything in like halfway, a couple, you know, turns of the actual screws, and then eventually I screwed everything down evenly. With this, at least in my case and with my unit, I worked my way down from the pivot, and it was fine after that. I haven't taken it apart since because I don't want to have to deal with that again. I will say for that price, again, there are other companies that could have done a little bit better in how things are constructed and how all the parts, you know, coexist together to make a functioning unit that isn't going to, you know, come undone and, you know, collapse on your finger. You don't want any of that kind of stuff. But the lock geometry is pretty decent. It's pretty standard. It's not super early, but I think tightening this will help a little bit. So if I were to take this apart, this knife has always had a really light detent for as long as I've had it, which has only been a couple weeks, but it's always had a very light detent. So I have to do, you know, push button and light switch. It works too, but you have to give it a little bit of force for it to really come out. There is no jimping, but like I was saying before, if I were to take this knife apart again, I would try to move the liner lock over just a little bit more, just to increase the tension of the detent. I think it would benefit from that, especially because there is no jimping there, which if you're gonna have a knife with really light detent, I think that some jimping for extra traction, surface area, and all that as it contacts your finger, I think that would be a great idea. But for whatever reason, this company is not a fan of putting jimping on their knives. Just their one premium flipper, and I actually have it on sale at nafsale.com. They're like, I don't know, almost 150 bucks brand new, but I'm selling my unit for $100. It has a wicked edge on it right now, and it's all nice and clean and ready to be shipped out if you guys are interested in that. But that does have some jimping, really big jimping, but it's sharp enough to where it's effective. And I think that that would have been perfect on here. Like 2, 3 on the top, 1 or 2 here on the back, and this thing would have been good to go. But besides that, I don't really have any major complaints. Really just circling back to the fact that this is a new brand. They're still in, you know, the early stages of, you know, making a name for themselves, and literally they're redoing all their branding and everything as we speak, and they're talking about different names and what they're going to be like representing themselves as in, you know, in the future. But as of now, they are still QYGMGS. Weird name. A lot of people do not like it. It's not that easy to remember, but it is an abbreviation of their factory name. I think that's what they had told me. But besides that, do I recommend this knife? I would, if you need a little, I guess, beater knife, and hopefully your unit, you know, comes apart and you're able to put it back together easily. I don't think that you guys are actually gonna have any like failing issues. But if this knife were to fail on you, if anything, if you have it in a really strong grip and you're may or may not be using it appropriately and the lock were to possibly fail, that flipper sticking out there will definitely keep the knife from coming down on your fingers. So there's some jimping on the spine here, it does feel good. It's actually nice and useful feeling, not super sharp, not super rounded off either. It is, you know, definitely useful and it feels good. Could have been a little further up the blade because this is all flat. It's not rounded off, but it is well knocked down due to the stone washing most likely. And there is a lot of strength that's carried out to the tip. So in use, in practice, this thing is great at, you know, doing push cuts. Even in a pinch grip is pretty darn nice. And yeah, I'd recommend this knife as long as, you know, you're aware of you might need to tinker around a little bit when it comes to taking this thing apart. So that was just my experience, and I'm just here to share that with you guys. But besides that, the action on this thing, it's pretty drop shotty, pretty smooth. Doesn't get hung up on anything. Doesn't feel to have changed since I got it, you know, the action itself. Maybe a little bit smoother because I took it apart, cleaned it, and put some lubricant in there. But that's about it. This thing hasn't really changed a whole lot, and I think that consistency is the reason why I'm actually recommending this. So there you guys go. Hope you enjoyed this little review, rant, whatever you want to call it. If you guys like what you see here, go ahead, like and subscribe. I definitely appreciate it. I have plenty more content coming out of all premium and budget tier knives. I'm just here to share with you guys what I think it's actually worth. So have a wonderful day.